Hello fellow humans, and what are the worst 5 tier 10s that you could use as your first tier 10? Let's find out. Starting at the least worst with the MX-50B, 3000 DPM, 380 damage, 4-shot autoloader, decent accuracy, 10 degrees of gun depression, good mobility for a heavy tank, because I mean, this has more to do with the medium tank than a heavy tank compared to, let's say, an E100, because I guess tank classes don't mean anything. And also armor that, again, doesn't mean anything. The sides and sides of the turret can be HE'd by pretty much anything. The front plate is very strong, but the front of the turret is extremely weak. You can ram really well with this vehicle, but for that you have to know where to go precisely, because you have a 23-second reload with 4 shells, which means once you're out, you're now helpless and you can't do anything about it, which does mean that whenever you play this thing, you have to position yourself perfectly to get the opportunity to unload the massive clip that you've got without getting into a position where you're going to get wrecked once you have unloaded. So that is the difficulty of this vehicle, and also the vehicles before that, because they obviously play the exact same, and the MX-50-120 only has 6 degrees of gun depression, making it even worse. So this is really not something that you would want to go for as your first tier 10 in any way, shape or form. However, later on, once you're already an experienced player, this can be a pretty good alternative to the T57 Heavy, which isn't really a great choice either, but is a much better choice than this one. This vehicle is an absolute monster in the right hands. And again, thank you very much for my Discord members for providing these amazing replays. And this vehicle, 4000 DPM, insane accuracy, 8 degrees of gun depression, mobility off the charts, and no armor. This vehicle is an absolute monster if you know how to play it. And that requires a lot of map knowledge and a lot of game knowledge as well, because any mistake you make in this vehicle can be deadly, and can be deadly very quickly, because you can get HE'd by a lot of tanks. And it's starting to repeat itself now, right? You don't have a vehicle in the MX-50B that doesn't have any armor whatsoever and is difficult to play. That's going to repeat itself a couple of more times in this video, but for that, stay tuned and don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want a better pick, for example, the E50M is a great choice. And check out my video for the top 5 tier 10s that you should get as your first tier 10, because the E50M is one of them. But as for tanks to start the game with, this is one of the worst choices. And even though it is an absolutely monstrous vehicle in the right hands, it requires a lot of map knowledge and a lot of skill to pull this off and to extract the maximum performance out of this insanely good gun. If you don't have that, if you're new to the game, you're not gonna have a great time. And on top of that, you have to play through either the Indian Panzer or the RU-251, which are really great vehicles, and also the Leopard PTA, which only has 6 degrees of gun depression, making the grind for this line quite the pain. Definitely not recommending anyone to do that, and especially because this vehicle is just so insanely good at what it does that if you were to be a new player in this vehicle put into a game, you would pretty much rob your team of one of the most potent vehicles on the entire game by simply not performing up to what it can do. And therefore, stay away from this vehicle until you're a better player, because when you are, this thing is something you have to have. What happens if we combine the Leopard's mobility and lack of armor with an autoloader? Well, then we get to the Batchat 25T at only 3000 DPM compared to the Leopard's 4000 almost. 350 alpha damage, which means you have a 1050 damage clip. Only 6 degrees of gun depression, limiting its scope of usability quite a bit. And a very good mobility, but obviously no armor whatsoever, and good enough accuracy. I mean, the reason for not picking this vehicle as your first tier 10 is extremely obvious. It's a tank that's very hard to play because it has no armor whatsoever, which means no margin for error whatsoever. And it also has a autoloader, which means you have to know how to position yourself properly in the flow of the match, which is something that takes a couple of thousand battles to actually work, and for some people it never works. So this is something that you definitely don't want to pick up as your first T10, because it is a vehicle that is very difficult to play. But, bonus tip, if you find an AFK and nobody is shooting at you and nobody is threatening you, then simply shoot that AFK, because now it's free damage. If the AFK wakes up, it can be a problem, so do that if you can. But the thing is, with the Batchat, it is a light tank, which means it does keep its camo rating while moving, which means it is stealthier than the Leopard 1. However, it is harder to play as well because of the autoloader, because you have to know better positioning, and also because you don't have that amount of positions you can play like you can do in a Leopard, because it has 8 degrees of gun depression and this vehicle only has 6. And that is why this is a very bad choice as a beginner vehicle, and so are the vehicles ahead, because even though the tech tree is very streamlined, which is something that is important for a first tier 10, because you want to have the same experience of gameplay throughout tier 8, 9, 10, at least, this is the case here. However, that experience is very difficult because all 3 of them are auto-loading light tanks, and that is something that is best stayed away from if you are a new player to this game. I do not, under any circumstances, recommend you to pick up the Batchat 25T as your first tier 10. At number 4, we have the multitude nerfed Grille 15, a vehicle that, again, has no armor whatsoever. You're starting to see the pattern very clearly now, are you? And a vehicle that does have quite a good gun and not a lot of mobility, with a lot of responsibility behind it, because even though the gun in this vehicle is very, well, it used to be better. You used to have 640 alpha damage, and I'll get to that later. It is a vehicle that has a lot of responsibility behind it, because the mobility isn't really that good. It goes well in a straight line, but it can't turn very well. It's also a very high vehicle, so it's very easy to hit, because it's going to stick around many places behind rocks. So it's not easy to hide either. The camo rating isn't really that great on top of that. So you're having a vehicle that does have a good gun, but is just around that very clumsy to play. Whereas with the Leopard, you have excellent mobility and also very good camo. With this vehicle, you have something that has been nerfed multiple times and just isn't very, let's say, organic to play because of how limited its traverse speed, for example, and also its gun depression is, at least over the front. It's better over the side, but it's still not that good. But you can play this vehicle in an aggressive role if you are good enough. But it used to have 640 alpha damage, which, if you know, the more alpha damage paper tank has, the easier it sort of becomes to play. Like, for example, the Sheridan, because the less times you have to expose yourself to the enemy, and the less times you have to expose yourself to the enemy, the less times they can shoot you and penetrate you. If you have no armor, that is a massive advantage. So nerfing the alpha damage is a direct nerf to this vehicle. And the thing is, not even the tanks before this are really beginner friendly. I mean, the Stora ML, forget it. The Borsig, absolutely not. The WT, solid, but overall, this is a horrible choice to start with. And now, let's combine everything with not good mobility, no armor whatsoever, horrible camo rating, and a autoloader that has an extremely long reload as well. And we end up at the worst beginner tank in the game, the FV4005. Now, why? Because it has an autoloader. That's hard to play. It's a massive target that has no armor whatsoever. That's hard to play. And it's also not really that fast because it's a Centurion chassis with a massive turret slap on top. And on top of that, the vehicles before it, they aren't autoloaders. So if you play those, you now end up with a vehicle that has nothing to do with the vehicles before it, because the Conway has Hesh and no autoloader. This thing is an autoloader. It doesn't have Hesh, so it has nothing to do with the vehicles before it as well. So this is, without a doubt, the worst beginner tank in the game.